thank you for being here. And I realized that I'm the only obstacle between you and the lunch, so I feel a bit of pressure about that. I'm joking. I am Michele Orselli, the CTO at Ideato. And in Ideato, well, we help our clients turning their ideas into products. And we have cross-functional teams, so like CSS guys, no offense, programmers, again, no offense, and obviously ops guys. And, well, have you ever tried measuring how much long it will take to start up a new project? Okay, raise your hands. Yeah, a few. Well, we tried to do that, and we found that in our particular situation, this time was, well, important in some sense. Because, well, we have different projects ongoing, different teams with different skills, and every time we need to start a new project, well, you have to choose the platform version, let's say the language version, the database version, I don't know, search engine version, stuff like that. Again, the distribution, and the machine version. And, well, if you consider you need to replicate this setup for every machine of inside your team, well, that time is quite big. For this reason, some years ago, we started to use Vagrant, and, well, the thing I liked the most was, yeah, the idea behind it, okay, the philosophy behind it, which is, well, you can find it in this blog post, The Tao of Vagrant. Basically, it's pretty simple. The idea is you have a repository with your project, you clone the repository on your machine, you launch Vagrant app, and you're done. Okay? You should get a fully configured virtual machine with all the stuff you need to, well, start developing your project. In my experience, well, it's just not like that. The workflow is something more like I clone the repository, I launch Vagrant app, and then I get some sort of error. Okay, I don't know, the sharing doesn't work properly, or I can find some files, or stuff like that. I think you get the idea. Have you ever experienced these problems? Yeah? Okay, it's pretty common actually. So, well, we used a lot Vagrant and fight a lot with it, and, well, in order to make its usage smooth for everyone in our team, okay? And basically the idea behind this talk is just to share what we learned about it, okay? For this reason, in this talk you won't find a getting starting guide to Vagrant, but rather some tips, okay, and tricks we learned over the time. Well, we have basically 4 sections. The first one, Vagrant file configurations. After that, we'll talk a bit about virtual machine performance, and we'll follow with some tips for configuring your application, and we'll end with some tricks on provisioning and packaging. So let's start with the first one, portable configuration tips, also known as don't mess with your team, okay? Remember, the Tao of Vagrant is, well, everyone should just be able to clone the repository, Vagrant app, and get a fully configured project, okay? For this reason, you don't have to use local names for your boxes, okay? When you launch Vagrant init, you get a Vagrant file with the box name is base. But base doesn't mean nothing, okay? And moreover, your teammates maybe doesn't have this box installed, okay? This is far more better, okay? You can specify a box on the service provided by HashiCorp, which is the company behind Vagrant, and in this way, if the box is not present on a given laptop, on the given host, it will be downloaded first. This also works, okay? You can specify an URL, maybe an HTTP URL, but I guess also formats are allowed. And again, in the same way, if the machine is not present, it will be downloaded first, okay? And your teammates won't get a strange error because the machine is not found. You should avoid absolute path in the Vagrant file. Again, for portability reasons, okay? Let's say I created a Vagrant file with this configuration, okay? I want to share the directory, my project, in this directory on the virtual machine, which is fine as long as my teammates or doesn't want to change this directory, okay? If they don't have this directory on their machine, Vagrant app will broke, okay? Will return an error again. This is far more better, okay? If you specify a relative path, you don't have to worry where your teammates will install the project, okay? It may seem obvious, but I've seen these mistakes so many times. So I thought it was worth sharing it. Again, you should move host-specific configuration outside the Vagrant file. Okay. By definition, the Vagrant file should be committed in your repository, which means that everyone got the same settings. But let's say that, well, maybe you have different machine in your team with different powers, okay? And let's say your colleague has a very fast machine and wants to assign more CPUs and RAM because he can. In this case, you should move these specific host configurations in a file like this, Vagrant file, local, whatever. This file won't be committed in the repository, okay? It's just local. It's different for every installation. And here you can choose to tweak some settings, like, again, RAM and CPU maybe are the most probably thing you want to change. In the Vagrant file, in the Vagrant file, you can read the file in this way, okay, and use the values you provided here. It's actually pretty straightforward. Makes sense? Okay, more or less. And as a rule of thumb, you can assign half of the CPU you have available in your machine and a quarter of the memory. So let's say you have 8 CPU, you can just assign 4 CPUs to the virtual machines, and again, if you have 16 gigs of RAM, you can assign, well, 4. Okay. In Vagrant, you can have different providers. The most used one is, well, VirtualBox, but also you can have VMware or others. And, well, if you have more than one provider installed, Vagrant tries to be smart and use the most efficient one. This means that if you have both VirtualBox and VMware, by default, Vagrant will try to use VMware because, well, it's faster. But this also means that if you have a box that's not packaged for this given provider, it won't work, okay? So your or another guy of your team will get an error. There is a way to force a specific provider, again in order to avoid strange errors, by providing this variable, Vagrant default provider. In this way, we are telling that, okay, don't care if you have both VirtualBox and VMware, please stick to VMware. Okay. Please stick to VirtualBox. Well, in a single Vagrant file, you can support multiple providers. Okay, it's pretty, again, straightforward to do that. You can define different configurations in this way: config VM provider, and then you specify the name of a provider. Okay, in this snippet, we're just basically tweaking RAM and CPUs in both providers, VirtualBox and VMware Fusion in this case. Okay, so basically, if you're inside of your team, you have different provider used, you can just provide a single way, a single Vagrant file to configure everything. Still makes sense? Okay. Feel free to stop me and ask questions if something is not clear. Okay, now I want to spend a few words on how to organize directories inside the virtual machine. Again, maybe it's obvious, but, well, I thought it's worth spending some time talking about it. Okay, the most common case is, well, you have only one project and you want to share it inside the virtual machine. A common setup is just to put the Vagrant file in the root directory of your project. Maybe you have a Vagrant or provision, call it whatever you want, directory, which contains the script used to provision the virtual machine. And then you have all the code of your project. Okay. In this way, you can share just the current directory in whatever you want inside the virtual machine. Okay. In this case, we are talking about web projects, so, well, we're going to share the My Project directory in the www directory in the virtual machine. Almost the same configuration, but here we choose to keep separated the Vagrant file and the Vagrant script from the code of your project. Okay, so here we are creating a project directory which contains all your code. And again, the Vagrant file and the Vagrant directory are the same of the previous example. Basically, it doesn't change anything, just you share the project directory inside the virtual machine. The last use case, which we used in some applications, basically if you have multiple applications, managed by the same virtual machine, because, well, maybe they're related in some way. They are, I don't know, microservices or stuff like that, and it makes sense to keep them in a single virtual machine. Well, you can have, again, a Vagrant file in the root directory of your project, and you can create a directory, name it www, which contains the several projects in several directories, and again, you have the Vagrant directory with the configuration scripts. In this case, you want to share the common root directory of the project inside the virtual machine. Okay, it's actually pretty straightforward. Remember that it's important to keep this file in the root directory of your project because, well, it's actually easy, okay? And you can issue command on subdirectories because Vagrant will check for this file recursively on the parent directories. Okay. Another useful tip. Well, I suggest you to install this plugin, Host Updater or Host Manager. There are a few of them. Basically, they helps you managing the host file inside your host machine. Okay. Let's say you have a website inside your virtual machine you want to access from the outside. And, well, you will need to update your host file with the IP address of the machine, which is manually and boring, and you need to remember to do that. Okay, remember, the Tower of Vagrant is Vagrant up, and I'm done. For this reason, this plugin do this for you. Okay, it checks for the IP you specified in the Vagrant file and adds a line in your host file in the host machine, which is pretty useful, in my opinion. Remember that maybe not everyone will have this plugin installed. And if the plugin is not correctly installed, you will get an error again. But you have a way to check if the plugin is present in your machine in this way. Again, in the Vagrant file, you can use has plugin and the name of the plugin. This function will return true if the plugin is installed and false if it's not. Here, basically, we are saying, okay, if this plugin is available, just configure it, use it. Otherwise, well, suggest me to install it before going on. Then actually, you can use a Ruby function called system, which allows you to, well, install it automatically. Again, in my opinion, pretty useful. Okay. Have you ever tried to configure multiple virtual machines inside one single Vagrant file? Raise your hands. No. Okay. Well, you can do that. Again, it's pretty simple. Basically, you can define different, let's call them roles, okay? And inside that, you can just specify all the configuration directives you should normally use in a Vagrant file. In this example, for instance, we are defining two roles, web and database. And then in the first one, we are just modifying the memories, assign 2 gigs of RAM and a given IP. In this one, we are just defining a different IP and a different provisioning script. Okay? Again, pretty straightforward. Questions so far? Okay. Dealing with shared folders. Well, in my opinion, this is the most painful things you're going to face when trying to use Vagrant. Because, well, it seems that as of now is not a sharing folders between different operating systems in a consistent way is not a really solved problem. Okay. The more operating system you want to support, Windows, Linux, Mac, the more pain you will suffer. Sorry about that. So, what can we do? Well, the first things, don't share nothing, okay? Well, basically if you just use the virtual machine inside and you just copy the code, you are done. You will experience a lot less problem. But this means also you need to become some sort of Vim guru or stuff like that. Okay. Well, you can use the native share, the one provided by VirtualBox, also VMware, but they are pretty slow, even if they just work almost fine with different operating systems. Another alternative is to use NFS, which is really, really fast compared to the native way of sharing folders, but the support is not so good of Windows, and also Linux probably you need to, well, configure it, install it, and so maybe it's not just so straightforward to make it work out of the box. Another alternative, which Vagrant provides, is, well, using rsync. Okay, so basically you're not sharing, again, anything between the host machine and the guest machine, but, well, there is an rsync process running in background, which, well, basically keeps the file synchronized. It works fine, even if, well, it's not a real share, and you have some kind of delay because the sync is not actually in real time. Again, this works pretty well in some use cases. Okay, another section, VM performance. Well, if you ever tried to run tests or build inside the virtual machine, Well, basically, it's something like that. Well, the image is quite not so viewable, but basically, running tests inside a virtual machine can take forever, okay, compared to a physical machine. And for this reason, well, we tried to do some experiments. The first thing was to, well, try to understand if one provider was better than another. And there is a really good post about that by Michele Orselli, which is the creator of Vagrant, where he compares the performance of file systems in different virtual machines. Basically, it turned out that in some of our projects, well, a 22 minutes build on VirtualBox become a 15 minutes build on VMware, which is basically doing nothing more than switching the provider. We got a 30% improvement. Okay, so my suggestion is, well, use it if you can. Okay, it will cost you a few bucks because, well, you need a plugin for Vagrant, which is $60, if I remember correctly, and again you need the license for VMware. But I think the price is not so high. You should really consider to do that. Use NFS if you can. This means that if you don't have a great variety of operating system you need to support, for instance, in our cases, we all work with Mac laptop. And, well, basically, NFS works quite fine and is way more faster than the native share of the folders. If you cannot, use VMware, at least, and you need to stick to VirtualBox, at least install this plugin, guest, which basically, well, it checks for the VirtualBox guest edition inside your host machine and the guest machine. If they don't match, you download the right version and install it. Again, remember that maybe not everyone has this plugin installed, so you need to check for this, okay, in this way, because we don't want that one of our teammates download the project, Vagrant app, and got an error. Well, remember that in the virtual machines, usually I/O is the bottleneck, okay? And in particular, loading web pages, running test suite are read-heavy operations, okay? So you should aim to, well, move all the I/O operation inside the shared folders because they are really, really slow, okay? We try to, again, do some experiments using the default provider VirtualBox. We use 3 PHP test suites, one pretty fast, 25 seconds, one medium, 2 minutes, and one slow. Okay. The first thing we did was, well, to move logs and cache files out of the shared folder. How can you do that? Well, this is an example of with Symfony, but actually it doesn't matter. You just need to know that inside the virtual machine you can use the dev shared memory directory, which means that it's a directory mapped on RAM, and you can just put all your files, your temporary file here, and, well, we got some nice performance improvement, okay? An alternative way is to mount a temporary file system in the logs and the cache directory. It will work fine in the same way. Database operations are, again, I/O intensive. So, well, if you can, move your database on RAM. For instance, if you use SQLite, you can move the file SQLite in the shared memory, and you will got nice performance improvements. Okay. Provisioning the machine is one of the part that usually takes a lot of time, okay? Because, well, you have to download the packages from the internet, Apache, PHP, MongoDB, Elasticsearch, whatever. And doing this for every project, again, can become quite slow. This plugin basically maintains a local cache in your machine of the package you have downloaded, okay? It can be configured in this way, okay? You can specify two versions, box or machine. Box means that the cache will be different for every kind of box. Let's say I have a box Precis 64, I don't know, Trusty 64, okay? There will be two different caches for these machines. And, well, again, trying reprovisioning the box, the same box with Git, PHP, Apache, MySQL, we got a 30% performance improvement. Okay? Because basically the packages were already present in our host machine. Make sense? More or less, okay? Another nice thing we can do to improve the performance is use cache file SD for NFS. Well, basically using it is pretty straightforward. It maintains a local cache on your virtual machine of the file shared via NFS. And this snippet is with Ansible, but again, it doesn't matter really. You can install this package. You need to activate it, but putting run equal yes in this file, and you restart the services, and you're done. And this is how you want to change your configuration to use NFS in this case. Here we got strange results. Basically, the fastest build perform worse, while the slowest build perform better. So, what's the story behind that? Should you trust the numbers I provided to you? Well, you can trust me because I am an engineer, and I do stuff like that. Not actually. But, well, the idea is you have to try it with your project and see if you got improvements, okay? Another section is how to, well, change your application configuration in order to work with the application inside the virtual machine as they were outside it. The first thing, how to access MySQL or whatever database management systems. In this particular case, you need to change the way you create the user. Okay, again, we have a Ansible snippet, and you have to specify that the host you want to give access to the user data is whatever, and you have to change the bind address in the MySQL config file to say, well, just MySQL, listen for incoming connection for every IP address. Okay. In this way, you can just access your MySQL instance from outside the virtual machine. Okay. Managing permission in shared folders. Again, I usually suggest, if you use a web server, to avoid any kind of problems for the development machine, to just set the name of the user you use to log in, which is Vagrant by default, as the same user who runs the web server. Okay. In this way, you won't experience any kind of permissions issues between the web server and your user. If you need, you can change how the permission of the files are specified when you shared files between the host and the guest machine in this way. Mount options 777. Again, pretty straightforward. Well, if you have to use a closed Git repository or whatever, I need to, well, usually access it using a SSH key. Well, you don't need to copy your key inside the virtual machine because Vagrant is able to use it if you specify this configuration, forward agent true. Okay, this means that the key you have in your host machine will be used by Vagrant when you try to do something like git clone. Okay. But also you need to check that in your host machine the forward agent is enabled. Okay. We experienced some issues in some cases where basically this wasn't working. Okay. If you work with front-end, or, well, maybe you don't directly work with front-end, but some of your colleagues do, well, there are a couple of tasks that basically watch the file system, looking for changes in some files, and then they run some kind of build process, okay, like converting less file or SAS files into CSS, or combining them, merging them, and stuff like that. If you use NFS to do that, maybe you should try to set this parameter to 1, which is basically, well, how often the file system will be refreshed. Okay. Otherwise, maybe you can just last some of the modification did by the scripts. Okay, last section, provisioning. Well, in the PHP ecosystem, but I guess also in other languages, there are a lot of tools that provides you, well, some predefined configurations, like phansilbe or stuff like that, which basically gives you a graphical interface. You choose some options, you get a zip file, you open it, Vagrant app, and almost everything is done for you. Okay. Well, in my opinion, they are a quick and easy way to start if you, it's the first time you approach this kind of tools. They are quite general, so maybe in the machine you will get something you don't need. Like, I have Mongo installed, but I don't need it actually. And all platforms are not kindly supported. So if you have a legacy project and you want to, well, create a virtual machine for that, you will have problems using such as user interfaces. But still, there are a lot of good ideas you can steal from. And for instance, this is a snippet taken from an Ansible script created by phansilbe. Basically, here we are checking that if we have Ansible playbook command in our host, then we run this. Otherwise, we use the script, which is fine. But again, can you assume that everyone in your team has the same Ansible version? Because if not, maybe, well, things will break when they try to provision the machine. And what if there is a new version of Ansible you want to use, but some of the parameters are not mapped, okay, in the Vagrant file because, well, they weren't present in the version before. What I'd like you to remember is that the provisioning tool you use for provisioning the machine is a moving part, okay? Be careful when you upgrade it. Okay? You should try to stick to one version and be careful when you want to bump the version of the provisioning tool up. My suggestion in general is to create, well, Vagrant independent provision script, which is not so difficult. Basically, you can create 2 scripts. The first one, Bootstrap, which, well, tries to install the provisioning tool and stuff like that, and another one that just executes the provision. Okay. In this way, you don't have to depend on, well, external tools, and you can be sure that the version you're going to install are the one you want to get. And also you can create your own template, like we did for our projects. In this way, you are in control of the provisioning command, as I said before, and you can perform additional checks on the host machine. Last section, distributing virtual machines. Well, the most important thing you need to remember is that provisioning does not create immutable virtual machines by default, okay? Because, well, for instance, there is a package update on a long-term support version of your, I don't know, Ubuntu distro, and maybe you will end with different package version, okay? Which means that maybe things will broke. So you can live on the edge and fix the provisioning script as it breaks, or you can try to use stable packages repositories. For instance, CentOS distributions are more conservative in upgrading packages, and they tend to broke less than Ubuntu. My suggestion is to create and distribute your own VM. Basically, when you start a project, you collect all the dependency you need, the PHP version, the database version, okay? You create a virtual machine, configure it, and once you're done, you create what is called a golden image. So an image which is already provisioned, and you don't need to reprovision every time. And you can distribute it to your team members, okay? Packaging is pretty straightforward in Vagrant with this command, vagrant package -- name, the name of your box. Then you can publish it somewhere, again on Atlas, which is the service provided by HashiCorp, or whatever you want. It just needs to be accessible in some way. And then you can provide, for instance, the box URL, and you're done. Okay, so, well, what I'd like you to remember for all these tips, which I hope you find some of them useful, don't make assumption about the host machine, okay? Because you cannot be sure your team members will have the same plugin installed, the same configuration, and stuff like that. You need to think about it if you want to create a portable Vagrant file. Provision the machine one time and then bake your own image and distribute it, okay? Because it's the most easy way to avoid problems. The more moving part, the harder we get. If you want to support multiple hosts, multiple providers, different operating systems, well, this will mean more core you will have to do. And my suggestion is try to keep it simple. Thank you.